Hi, welcome to ATHENASIA. I'm Laurent Timmermans, and in this video, I will be giving you an update on how to open and maintain your company in Hong Kong in 2024. So this is a series of video. It will be 7 different parts. So in part 1, we'll be discussing how to open your company in Hong Kong in 2024. The second part will be focused on banking in Hong Kong in 2024. The third part will be covering company secretary and maintenance in Hong Kong. Then we'll be discussing accounting and audit. Then we'll be discussing corporate tax in Hong Kong, so part 5. Part 6 will be covering the specific case of offshore tax exemption in Hong Kong, if you're not living here and you want to benefit from this specific tax rate. And finally, if you want to move to Hong Kong, we'll be discussing the Hong Kong visa in 2024. Now let's start with the opening of the company. So to open a company in Hong Kong, you need one shareholder. So the shareholder is one owner. Now, if you want to invite family, friends, and whoever you want to know, you can go up to 50 shareholders in Hong Kong. But the minimum will be 1. It can be either a natural person, like you and me, or it could be a body corporate. Then you need 1 director. The director and the shareholder can be the same person. However, you will need 1 natural person. So one of them has to be a natural person. The director doesn't need to be a Hong Kong resident. And if you're not Hong Kong resident, you don't need to use a nominee director. So it's not like Singapore, for example, where you need a nominee director. In Hong Kong, no, you can be living outside Hong Kong, be the sole shareholder, sole director of your Hong Kong company. There's no problem. Then you need a share capital. The minimum in Hong Kong will be 1 Hong Kong dollar. Okay. Now the common practice is to have 10,000 shares of 1 Hong Kong dollars each. The reason for that is that in the past we were opening bank account with HSBC. When I say in the past, it was prior to 2016, and HSBC always asked an initial deposit of 10,000 Hong Kong dollars. So it made it really easy to have 10,000 shares of 1 Hong Kong dollars each, and at the time of opening the bank account, we're just freeing the capital and depositing the capital on the HSBC account. But if you want a 1 Hong Kong dollar share capital, no problem. Now, if you want a million Hong Kong dollar share capital or even $1 million US share capital, it's also possible. Now, what you have to be careful is that I'm talking here about how to open a limited company in Hong Kong. And the limitation, what the limited stands for, is limited liability. And your liability, that means that your liability is limited to the capital you are putting in the company. If you're saying that your company has a share capital of $1 million US, that means your responsibility, your liability goes all the way up to $1 million US, even if you didn't free this capital immediately at the opening of your company venture, So what I mean by freeing, that's a bit of French terms, but basically I mean paid up. If you didn't pay up your capital initially, it's okay. You can just run the business and say you have $1 million USD capital, but you are liable to this $1 million USD. So be really careful with that. Most of the time, you don't need to have a huge capital to start with. Then you need 1 registered address. So the registered address is your official address in Hong Kong. It cannot be a PO box. So this is the place where you will receive all your official documents, where the bank will be sending you your bank statement, unless you ask to send to another address. But that's basically where you have all the official communication with the company registry, with the Inland Revenue Department. So if you work with ATHENASIA, that will be our address. So this is where we put the address of our clients. It's a good idea to work with a service provider for the registered address. Even if you don't work with ATHENASIA, you choose another company, no bad feeling. But basically, it's a good idea to work with the registered address of your service provider, because then every official document that is being sent to this address can be treated immediately. So really good idea to at least use this address for official documents. Now, if you have a separate address for your business operations, no problem. You can keep using that one for your regular operations. But for everything official, good idea to use the registered address. Then you need the company secretary. So the company secretary will be covering it in the third part of this series. So I won't talk too much about it, but it's not an administrative function. It's a paralegal function. Since 2018, if it's a body corporate, this company needs to have a license. It's called TCSP license. In ATHENASIA, we have this license. So yeah, you need this company secretary. Now be careful if you don't work with ATHENASIA, because we always offer full package for our company setup. So you pay one price and everything is included. Sometimes providers like to spread the cost and say, okay, the opening is this much, but then on top you have to pay for company secretary, for the registered address, etc. So make sure that if you don't work with us, make sure that everything is included in your price so that you don't have to have any bad surprise down the road. Okay. So for the opening of the company, you will need a certificate of incorporation by filling the NNC one. So this will cost you 1,720. And you will need to fill in the IRB one, which is for business registration, which is 2,150. Then you will have to open an SCR, so it's a significant control register, to explain who are the main controllers of the company. So who control directly or indirectly the company. This register is not public, so nobody can get access to it. It will be in your registered address, but if there is a control from the police or from any agencies from the government, we as company secretary, we have to be able to show who's behind the company. But it's not public, it's only for official use. Then we need to do a background check. So this is for anti-money laundering and counter-terrorist financing. We have to do a yearly background check on all the shareholders and directors of the company. So that's one thing that needs to be done at the opening of the company. Now, a few considerations as well. When the company will be open, you may have a green box. So why I say may is because it's less and less common that people actually get a physical green box. In the past, they had like a big box green. That's why it was called a big green box, with some common seal inside, rubber chops, some copies of the article of associations, some blank share certificates, etc. But nowadays it's done more and more on a virtual format, or we do some reduced box so that you don't have to store a really big box, especially in Hong Kong where the cost of storage is pretty expensive. People don't really want to have a box laying around. But if you want to have one, and you work with us, for example, we can get you a formal green box. The opening of the company take 1 to 3 days. You can totally do it in 1 day, but sometimes it might take a bit longer. This is mostly due to your service provider if they have a lot of incorporation, but normally it's totally doable in 1 day, except if there is a random check. So over 12 years running my business in Hong Kong, I never got any random check until this year, where we started to have a lot of people flocking from Dubai in Hong Kong. And yeah, the company registry a couple of times did a random checks on these people. And then what happened is that the opening take a bit extra time. Generally within 1 week it's done. Now, bank account, can you bank in Hong Kong in 2024? Yes, you can. So we'll cover that in the next section. Do you need a bank account? Is it required to have a bank account though? Not necessarily. So you don't necessarily need to have a bank account to run the company. It's not mandatory, but obviously it's quite difficult to run the business without a bank account. Now, if you want, you can bank offshore as well. That's up to you. But you can have an account in Hong Kong in 2024, which we'll cover in the next part. Employee compensation insurance. So one thing you have to be careful is if you hire people in Hong Kong, and you have employees here, you will need to get an insurance called employee compensation insurance, which is mandatory. So it's really cheap, especially if you work with services. If you work in dangerous stuffs like construction and you have like 100 workers, yes, this insurance may be a bit expensive. But for services, it's really cheap. It's basically covering any incident that could occur in your office. Maintenance. So you have to be careful of one thing. Opening a company in Hong Kong is not the end of your venture. It's only the beginning. So every year you have to maintain this company, and this will have a cost, okay, which we'll cover in section 3. I will tell you everything that has to be done for the maintenance. But be careful that there is this maintenance every year in Hong Kong. Accounting and audit. So again, every year you have to do your accounting, get it audited, and send the tax return back to the Inland Revenue Department. So this is also another thing you need to know. I like to tell you everything that has to be done with your company from the beginning, so you don't have bad surprise. You better know from the start what you will have to do with your company on a yearly basis. Then Hong Kong visa, if you want to move to Hong Kong, is it possible? How is it with the visa? Well, this again will be covered in the last part of this series. So really stay tuned on the other part, like check them out, see if they're already posted, because you have all this information there. And what you really have to be extremely careful when you buy or purchase a company opening is make sure you have full packages. So make sure that you have all the filling of the paper for sure, but also the cost to the government is included. So you have almost $4,000 there. It's just pure cost that goes to the government. So anything cheaper than 4,000 Hong keys, it's not making any sense because you have to pay the government. So make sure it's there. Make sure you have a company secretary, a registered address, because those two are mandatory. Okay, so this is for the company set up in Hong Kong. When this is done, you can move to the next step, which will be opening a bank account, and this will be covered in the part 2 of this series.